Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Down. Welcome to yet another Cutter Top 10 sports video. And we're talking Major League Baseball today. We're talking about the top 10 shit heaps, the top 10 worst baseball teams of all time. Rocking the Blue Jays sweater and hopefully trying to get some things going. So these are the 10 worst MLB teams of all time. Now, of course, fortunately, both the Blue Jays and Expos missed out on the list. Anyway, number 10 is the 1998 Florida Marlins. The 1998 Marlins were one of the biggest disappointments from a World Series ever team. The Marlins were the 1997 World Series champions. And then all of a sudden, they just floundered. The team wasn't really supposed to be in the playoffs as well. They won the wild card. They took care of the Giants. They took care of the Braves thanks to Eric Gregg's wide strike zone in Game 5, helping Livan Hernandez. And then they beat Cleveland in 7, which was piss poor. Anyway, they were trying to defend their World Series title with Jim Leyland as manager, but they put up 54 wins, and it was notable for having arguably the biggest fire sale in sports history. Auctioning off basically almost all of their notable players. They were, in fact, the first defending world champs to be last in their division and to have 100 losses. In fact, they were worse than the Devil Rays and the Diamondbacks. The D-Rays only lost 99 games. The Diamondbacks lost 97. But anyway, the Marlins actually won on opening day, but then lost 11 straight. So they made a lot of moves. Devon White, the center fielder that the Marlins picked up, fired the Toronto Blue Jays. In free agency, he went to Arizona for a minor league player. Scott Podsednik was actually drafted by Texas in the Rule 5 draft from Florida. Dirk Lee was traded by San Diego to Florida for Kevin Brown. So Kevin Brown, even though that he was a great pitcher for the Marlins and signed that contract, he actually ended up going to San Diego in the trade for Dirk Lee. I thought it was a free agency move, but no, it wasn't. Because I know Kevin Brown left the 98 Padres for the Dodgers. Kevin Millar was signed for free agency. So their opening day starters, Cliff Floyd in left field, former Expo. Edgar Renteria, a powerful shortstop. Ryan Jackson at first base. I saw Ryan Jackson, ooh, and I feel good. Derek Lee, I think, was a prospect. He would be a good first baseman later on. Gary Sheffield in right field. He was still good. Mark Kotsay, decent center fielder. Charlie Johnson, good catcher. Craig Counsell, second base, the hero of the Marlins World Series thing. Josh Booty, the future LSU Tiger quarterback, because I believe he played afterwards. Yeah, he played in Major League Baseball, and then he went to LSU, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he had a baseball career from 94 to 98, and then he went to play for LSU for 2 years in football. Kind of should be cheated because, he's a professional in baseball, and then he goes to the NCAA. That should be fool's gold. Livan Hernandez was the pitcher, the guy from Cuba. The Marlins, well, they made some notable moves. Well, the big move was Mike Piazza and Todd Seal being traded by the Dodgers to the Marlins because the Dodgers knew that Piazza was going to free agency. They didn't want to lose him. So Florida got rid of 4 key players on their 1997 squad. Bobby Bones, that's in Bobby Bonilla, Jim Eisenreich, Charlie Johnson, and Gary Sheffield all went to LA for the one of Mike Piazza. And then Florida decided to trade Piazza 8 days later to the Mets for Preston Wilson, who was pretty good, but Preston Wilson, I think, was a better Rocky. So anyway, at the end of it ended up being Greg Zahn, Dirk Lee, Craig Counsell, Todd Seal, Edgar Renteria, Cliff Floyd, Todd Dunwoody, and Mark Kotsay as the main guys by position and all that. Pitching-wise, Livan Hernandez won 10 games, but everyone else just didn't fit in the mold and all that. So yeah, they had a massive fire sale. Number 9 is the 1988 Baltimore Orioles. They were craptacular. They started at 0-21, the worst start in Major League Baseball history. Funny thing is, many teams were worse than that. Well, they only won 54 games, but still, many teams who had 110 losses or worse didn't even get to 0-21. Not even the 62 Mets. But anyway, 0-21. And the one disc jockey actually said he would not go off the air until the Orioles won a game. Well, unfortunately, though, he had to go through, 6-7 games after he made that pledge. So, yeah, he had to play a DJ set almost every hour of every day. But it's pathetic. 0-21, especially when you have Cal Ripken Jr. on your squad. I mean, that's pathetic. I mean, Eddie Murray went from Baltimore to the Dodgers. Yeah, he was the first baseman for the Dodgers in 1988. But yeah, the Orioles just floundered. All that. But there was a silver lining. The next year in 1989, the Orioles actually shocked everyone by having the lead in the AL East for many days until the Blue Jays caught up with them and won it on the second last day of the season. Number 8 is the 1952 Pittsburgh Pirates. This was the team that basically got rid of Ralph Kiner. The Pittsburgh GM basically said that, we're eighth with Ralph Kiner. We could be eighth without him. And that's what happened. Lack of offensive firepower. Ralph Kiner went elsewhere. I think went to the Cubs. But yeah, the Pirates just sucked and all that. So, without Ralph Kiner, they sucked. So yeah. Number 7 is the 2018 Baltimore Orioles. If I remember correctly, this is the season in which Chris Davis started at 0 for 45 hitting. And he's a home runs hitter and all that. The Orioles lost 115 games, winning below 50 wins, which is hard pressed. Not even the 1988 version of the Orioles were that shitty. Now the 2018 Orioles sucked, and they took 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. In fact, well, the Orioles were tops in the division last year, the AL East, but they've taken a massive tumble backwards. Yeah. Number 6 is the 1935 Boston Braves. The 1935 Boston Braves were terrible. The Braves franchise in Boston looked bad. They played at Braves Field, which is very huge, way more big than Fenway Park. I mean, it was cavernous and all that. The Braves management just sucked. Like the owners were squeezing pennies out of everyone's boogers and all that. Boston Braves, 20 plus years after their great 1914 miracle. So anyway, the Braves would be below 25%, 38 wins, 115 losses. It was a 154 game schedule. They probably would have gotten to at least 122 losses, maybe 120 losses. The Braves really suffered through a woeful season. Babe Ruth actually came on board for the 35 Braves after the Yankees welched on his deal to be like a coach or manager in the Yankees organization. Although he was offered to trip to New York to be with the AAA squad, Babe Ruth basically said no, and his third wife and his business manager said no. So he took a hike and went back to Boston. He was a Red Sox pitcher / occasional hitter before his ego got to him, and they traded him in 1920. But yeah, he went back to Boston. He had a game in which he had 3 home runs against the Pirates at Forbes Field, including one that went over the right field roof. But that was basically the last good stuff of Babe Ruth, and he actually wanted to be at an event for the world's largest ocean liner or something like that, and he was gone by June 2nd, and the 35 Braves just sucked. Number 5 is the 1916 Philadelphia A's. The Philly A's were always known in Philadelphia pretty much as the team that could basically bring you the World Series and then after a few seasons sell off their players for money, and then they basically go down. They go up and down more times than the stock exchange. So the 1916 Philadelphia A's sucked. They were 36 and 117. Of course, this was a 154 game schedule. So I would think they probably, more than likely, they probably would have the most losses in a modern season. But nope, thankfully they only played 153 games. It was just massively dropped. I mean, the A's were the AL champs in 1914 before losing the World Series to the Boston Braves. But, they had to sell. Fire sale and all that. The A's would bring in all these guys. They even had Babe Ruth on their contract, but they had to sell them to the Boston Red Sox. So yeah, the Philadelphia A's just had good pitching, and then they had to sell all their players and all that. Home Run Baker would be sold. Jack Coombs would be sold. Ruben Riddell would be sold. That was the problem with the Philly A's. They had almost as many last place finishes as they had first place finishes. So the Philadelphia A's looked common. Like the common man. and the 1916 team sucked and all that. They did bring a little bit of decency in the late 20s, but once again, finances would have to make them sell players. The A's franchise in Kansas City sucked so badly, they never had a winning season in Kansas City and all that. Compared to the Milwaukee Braves, after they picked up from the Boston Braves, Milwaukee never saw their Braves go below 500. But yeah, Oakland and now Las Vegas and all that. Number 4 is the current worst team in baseball by losses, the 2024 Chicago White Sox. I mean, you can't believe it, but yeah, the 2024 White Sox were terrible. I mean, 41 and 121. So they just hit the mark of most losses. Well, 120 was the record set by another team on this list, but they put up number 121 and all that. They started off 3-22, the worst start in the franchise history, and actually the worst start in the wild card era post 1995 since the 2022 Reds and the 2003 Tigers, who are also on this list. You know, it was actually, the second worst in modern baseball history. So yeah, the White Sox just couldn't believe it and all that. They just couldn't. Yeah, they had troubles. Pedro Grifo was a terrible manager. He finished his career after being fired August 8th at 89 and 190, 100 games below 500. Grady Sizemore would be named interim manager. He probably didn't get spanked by Elka from its hunt in Cleveland. So yeah, that's amazing and all that. Grady Sizemore would be name dropped. August 17th, they actually became the first team to be eliminated from playoff contention in 2024, and it was the earliest playoff exit since the divisional era in 1969. And then on August 25th, they were the fastest team since the 1916 A's to lose 100 games in a season. When they lost number 107 on September 1st to the Mets, that was the franchise record and all that. They had a franchise record 16 straight home losses. And on September 27th, they actually lost their 121st game. But the White Sox actually swept their final 3 games to get to 41 and 121, just missing out on, they had 121 losses. It could have been worse. It should have been worse. So anyway, yeah. So they actually went 10 and 15. They were 5 and 1 in their last 6 games. The White Sox thought they had good job getting Mike Soroka from the Braves, Canadian. They signed Paul DeYoung to a contract. They acquired Max Stassi from the Braves. They even got Martin Maldonado. But the White Sox in March would trade Dylan Cease to San Diego for 4 players and basically lived to regret it. The White Sox would trade Michael Kopech to Los Angeles before the trade deadline and Tommy Pham to St. Louis for some bad players. The White Sox would trade Eloy Jimenez, who was a pretty good player, to Baltimore and would trade Paul DeYoung to Kansas City. So yeah, 41 wins, 121 losses. The worst part, so anyway, lost 121, all that. So anyway, do you know how things were going on, all that? I mean, when you look at the guys for the 2024 White Sox, Mike Clevenger was on that much. Gary Crochet, good pitcher. Eric Feedy, good pitcher. Michael Kopech. Brian Shaw was on this team. Michael Soroka. Steven Wilson. Martin Maldonado on this team. He was a decent guy. Paul DeYoung, well, he got traded. Nicky Lopez. Yohan Moncada played for the full season on the team. Andrew Vaughn. Andrew Benintendi as part of the worst team by losses. Eloy Jimenez before he got traded. Tommy Pham before he got traded. Kevin Pillar, former Blue Jays icon. Louis Robert, number 88. He was there too. But yeah, it was just Horrible and all that. Benintendi had 20 home runs. I feel so bad for the guy. The weird thing was Gary Crochet actually was the MLB pitcher in the one for June, even though they sucked. So that tells you a lot. Number 3 is the 2003 Detroit Tigers, who were the worst team in American League history by losses until the 2024 White Sox came along. But yeah, they won 43 times 119 losses and all that. It was just like they were nicknamed the Motor City Kitties and all that. So yeah, and all that. So it was just dismal and all that. They had a terrible season in 2002. They actually had problems. The farm system wasn't producing. The big league club had major deficiencies, and contracts being paid to veterans not playing expectations. They lost Juan Acevedo, Ryan Simon, and Robert Fick in 2003. Alan Trammell would lead the team and all that. He had problems and all that. Jerry Bonderman and Nate Robertson would be pushed onto the main roster. They actually started 1-17. All that. Mike Maroff would actually lose 21 games, becoming the first pitcher since Brian Kingman in 1980 to lose 20 or more games. Jeremy Bonderman had 19 losses, but was pulled for the rotation with 2 weeks remaining. And Nate Correcho was third in losses. So it was the only time in Major League history the top 3 losing pitchers were on the same team. The Tigers actually won 5 out of the last 6 to get to 43 wins with 119 losses. So they avoided the 1962 Mets and their record and all that. The Tigers actually came back from an 8-0 deficit against the Twins to win 9-8. Yeah. The As of 2023, the 2003 Tigers were the 12th worst team based on winning percentage. But unlike the 2003 Tigers, many other teams actually had off-field troubles and all that. Yeah, the 2003 Tigers were known as the worst team of all time without a good excuse. So anyway, Dimitri Young actually had a good year. 297 batting average, 29 wins. So yeah, all that. Yeah. Jimmy Walker did okay. All that. The team was in shambles. But the joke would be on the American League soon because in 3 years, the Tigers went from shit house to penthouse as they were the AL champs in 2006, thanks to Mags Ordonez's 3-run home run against Oakland, 22 years to the day that Kirk Gibson helped the Tigers win the '84 World Series. So after the 2003 season, despite their crappy record, they actually acquired Pudge Rodriguez, Carlos Guillen, Ugraf Verbena, and Rondell White and turned it around. They won 72 games in 2004 and then did decent in 2005. But in 2006, they won 95 and got to the World Series. 10 players from the 2003 team actually were part of the 2006 pennant winners. So that was actually quite weird and all that. So yeah, I feel bad for the Tigers and all that. Steve Avery was on that team, even though he didn't pitch well. Matt Anderson, the 100-mile guy before injuries removed. Jeremy Bonderman. So the team, Mike Maroff, Nate Robertson, Fernando Ronnie on that team. I know he plays in the Inter-County Baseball League in Ontario. No, Steve Sparks, the knuckleballer. Yeah, Randall Simon was traded by the Tigers to the Pirates for a player to be named later. Steve Avery was signed as free agent. AJ Hinch was purchased by the Tigers March 29. And he would be catching runs like Brendan Inch, who usually was a third baseman himself. Shane Halter, Omar Infante, Canadian Danny Clausen on that team, Warren Morris, LSU icon, Dean Palmer on that team, Carlos Pena on that team, Ramon Santiago, Bobby Higginson, Cody Roth, Dimitri Young. Yeah, that was just terrible. Number 2 is the 1962 Mets. The 62 Mets were an expansion team. The benchmark for how crappy an expansion team would be. New York was reeling because both the Giants and Dodgers left the New York area. The Giants would leave for San Francisco, although it almost was Minneapolis, and the Dodgers would leave for Los Angeles. So yeah, New York had National League Baseball for the first time in 1962, but unfortunately, that team sucked. They lost their first game 11-4 and lost the first 9 games. They won. They lost 120 times, the worst in modern MLB history until the 2024 White Sox broke it. It's still the worst team in National League history. Frank Thomas, not that Frank Thomas, but Frank Thomas of the 50s, he actually got 34 home runs, 94 RBIs. So, all that. Paul Blair was signed as an amateur free agent by the Mets, but unfortunately he wouldn't last that long, and obviously the Orioles took him. Billy Lowe's was purchased from the Giants, which was big, but then the Mets returned him to the Giants. Big mistake because Billy Lowe's would have a decent season for the 1962 Giants, making them in the World Series. The Mets traded a player to be named later to the Milwaukee Braves for Frank Thomas, and it worked out. The Mets would send Gus Brown to the Braves. On moving the expansion draft and all that, minor league affiliates and all that. Yep. Their opening day lineup: Richie Ashburn, great Phillies legend; Felix Mantilla, decent Milwaukee Brave; Charlie Neal; Frank Thomas from the Milwaukee Braves; Gus Brown from the Cincinnati Reds; Gil Hodges, the former Dodger icon; Don the Gerbil Simmer; Hobie Landreth; and Roger Craig, who was decent in his own right. And then, in one of the weirdest moves of all time, the Mets purchased Harry Cheedy, from a catcher from the Indians, and then was returned June 15th. So basically, he was traded for himself. Don Zimmer would be traded by the Mets to the Reds for Bob G. Miller. The Mets picked up Vinegar Ben Mizell from Pittsburgh, but it didn't work out. Rivals Mark Thornberry would be sent to the Mets. The guy who had his 100th career home run tainted by him running backwards. The Mets sell Hobie Landreth to the Orioles. Ed Kranepool was signed as a free agent, one of the best Mets of all time, who recently died. Vinegar Ben Mizell was released, and all that. So, yeah, Roger Craig played on that team. Jay Hook, Al Jackson, Clem LeBin, former Dodgers icon, Brooklyn Dodgers icon. They had 2 Bob Millers at pitchers, Bob G. Miller and Bob L. Miller, and Vinegar Ben Mizell. Catchers, they had 7 of them: Chris Cannicero, Harry Cheedy, Choo Choo Coleman, Joe Ginsberg, Hobie Landreth, Joe Pignatano, and Sammy Taylor. Elio Chacon, in infield, Gil Hodges, Ed Kranepool, Felix Mantilla, Charlie Neal, Mark Thornberry, and the gerbil Don Zimmer. Outfielders: Gus Brown, Joe Christopher, Jim Hickman, and Frank Thomas. So, yeah. But number one is a team not in modern MLB history. It's the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. You're thinking, the 1899 Cleveland Spiders? Really, Jeff? Yep, I tells you. So this team actually was bit by one of the worst things possible. That team and another team in the other league, the American Association's St. Louis Browns, or what some people call the St. Louis Perfectos, were in the American Association, the predecessor to the American League. So since Cleveland and St. Louis were owned by the same players, the owners decided to move all the Cleveland Stars from 1898 to St. Louis. They became a good team, but the 1899 Spiders were a shell of themselves. They actually had to play many games on the road to avoid home losses and financial problems and all that. So if you're thinking about how shitty a team can be, look at the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. There's some literature on it, and you should watch it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.